should bring to us is going to be very inspiring, especially for those of you who aspire to develop research project in interpreting studies. The title, as you can see, is Unlocking the Power of Big Interpreting Data Insights from CEPIC and CETILC. Actually, Professor Han is also an editor of various journals, including Journal for Interpreter and Translator Training. Right. So let's give a big round of applause to welcome Professor Han.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Should I stand here or?
No, you can sit. You can sit. You can sit.
Okay. Okay, I'll listen to the producer. Well, thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank Professor Victoria Lai, Professor Dong Li for inviting me over to give you this talk, and it is really a great honor to meet all of you, and most importantly to share what we have been researching in the past few years, and also hopefully we can inspire some of you to continue doing some research in interpreting after practice sessions that you have attended. So as you can see, the title of today's presentation is Unlocking the Power of Quotation Mark Big Interpreting Data, because we believe that because of the difficulty, some of you have been doing research on interpreting, it may be very difficult for us to collect the data. And sometimes when we collect a very limited amount of data, it is already a lot of work. So I use quotation mark big interpreting data here to hopefully we can, especially at the end of the presentation, we can discuss possible ways of sharing data so that we can collaboratively put together more resources and also work on more meaningful findings of research. I will introduce to you two projects that I have been working on, and hopefully those projects can provide some possible links for you to explore, to learn how to explore corporate data and how to construct your own corporate in the long run. So to start with, this is the overview. I'm going to start with a brief overview of what we may call corpus-based interpreting studies, and then we're going to move forward in corpus-based interpreting studies together in the second part of the presentation. After that, I'm going to introduce to you two corpora. One is what we may call CEPIC, and the other one is a sister corpus. I call it CETILC. So as you can see, how the name trying to align up the names together so that people can remember them easily, and there are some internal association between those two corpora, as you may see later on. To start with, why did I use big interpreting data? Let's look at a term which is not originally from the interpreting studies, but can provide a lot of insights because there are a lot of similarities between those two terms that I'm going to bring together. So the first term here is called data mining. It should be a very familiar term to you nowadays, but if we look at the official definition of what we may call data mining, is the process of discovering interesting patterns and knowledge from large amounts of data. This definition is very important because there are two keywords I'd like to highlight. The first is the process. So data mining is a process, it's not a result. And the second keyword is large amounts of data, because the very beauty of mining data is because we have large amounts of data, and the patterning, the visualization can be very powerful, so that we can review some of the knowledge patterns. We can learn more about what is the reality, what may be the theory. I'd like to, in the second slide, compare what we may call corpus preparation to data mining process. I'd like to quote from Dash and Arumotsi in the publication of 2018, when they summarized the 6 main features of a corpus. And they used the very word CORPUS. C stands for the compatibility of the data to computer. And then O refers to the operationalization in research and application. R stands for representativeness, and the P stands for the process. Pay attention, processed by both man and machine here. And then we have U and S standing for unlimited in amount of language data and the systematic information and representation. Now let's look at data mining. The very process of data mining constitutes of the following steps: import, tidy, transform, visualize, model. That constitute the very cycle of exploration. And then after that, we have communication as the final stage of data mining. And here's a more detailed description, but I'd like to highlight in the very process of data mining, we start with data cleaning. And in that case, look at the C, compatible to computer. Then it refers to actually the process of data cleaning as well. And then again, in data mining, we talk about data integration. And then in that case, we're still talking about compatibility, and also we refer to the operationalization of the data as well. After that, data selection rings a bell, very similar to representativeness of the data that we selected to be included in the corpus. Data transformation, then it refers back to the process that is involved in the preparation of a corpus, and then data mining, pattern evaluation, knowledge representation can correspond to the P, U, and S correspondingly. Okay? So since we talked about the similarities in between those two sub-disciplines, then we would like to then bring to your attention another keyword of tonight. What is a corpus? So corpus is a large collection of authentic texts that have been gathered in electronic form according to a specific set of criteria. Here I highlighted again a set of keywords: authentic texts, very important for corpus studies. And then after that, electronic form. It has to be electronic, otherwise we can't use any kind of technique forms or tools to help us to visualize the data, similar to the case of data mining. Last but not least, specific set of criteria, very important. So this goes to the representativeness of the data. Again, the selection of the data and data mining. So after we get clear of what a corpus may refer to, the next question is, what is an interpreting corpus? Since I believe all of you here are learning interpreting. Then let's revisit the very important definition of what is interpreting proposed by Koch-Hacker. So interpreting, according to Koch-Hacker, is a form of translation in which a first and final rendition in another language is produced on the basis of a one-time presentation of an utterance in the source language. So in this case, we have, again, a couple of highlighted keywords: first and final rendition of another language. This means that if we can recapture the first and final rendition of that language, then we can get together a corpus, right? Authentic data, final output. But bearing in mind, we also focus on one-time representation here. So to capture interpreting data can be very, very difficult, especially for those who have collected your own corpora before. Because for this one-time presentation, you have to struggle a lot. You don't know what kind of information to be included, what can be useful, and how far the annotation or how far the kind of data cloning should go. Now let's look at the kind of varieties of data in interpreting studies. Those data formats are very familiar to you, I believe. Video, definitely we deal with a lot of videos, and that can help us to recapture not just the language, the voice, but also the environmental factors, variables relevant to interpreting students and the studies, of course. Secondly, multilingual formats of the data. Most of the cases we're dealing with bilingual data, but as a matter of fact, we are dealing in certain cases more than 1 or 3 languages, as the case of CEPIC we're working on. Sound waves. We're very familiar with this as well. We want to not just study the transcripts, but also we want to see how pitch may affect the interpreter's performance, for example, or stress or pauses. So all of those information are can be reflected in sound waves, and that can be another reflection of the kind of data that we can collect in interpreting. We also have a very early study by Goldman elsewhere, who tried to recapture the process of simultaneous interpreting by writing down the source language, the target language, but align them according to a time frame. So this may be very familiar to us as well. And also we see the sound waves, and then we can see how the sound waves of the source text differ from the target language. This can be a very good visualization of the interpreting data, and it recaptures a lot of information as well. In a recent study, I worked together with MA graduate and together with Professor Michael Carr from Kent State University. We're trying to look at the ear voice span in note-taking. Then we're trying to see how we can recapture the data, and most importantly, how to quantify the data. So again, in order to recapture the data, we have the source text, we have the target text, and we have the time lapse in between. The time when the interpreter hears the voice of the original speaker, and the time when the interpreter starts interpreting. And in the same study, we collected students note-taking as well, and we are trying to find out different patterns in the note-taking, and also how the source language elements can be segmented and represented by note-taking data, and that can constitute very valuable resources as far as corpora-based interpreting studies are concerned. So this is just an example of how note-taking data can be quantified. So for example, we have the source speech here, and then we have the participants, what we call the natural language units, and then we have 1, 2, 3, and 4 units to be assessed in the note-taking. And then based on that, we look at the participants' interpreting transcript, and then we mark down 1, 2, 3, and 4 to see whether they are successfully rendered into the target language. So this is also another way to put interpreting data into a corpus and to analyze them through the tools and through the materials that can be put together by corpora tools. Then the next question is, of course, we look into the discipline of interpreting, but we also need to take a step back and to look at interpreting from an outsider's perspective to see how the study of interpreting may bring impact to other disciplines. Because we cannot just refine ourselves to our own discipline, and we need to tell people why they need to read, say, for example, a paper on interpreting, why we need to purchase, for example, an MIR machine to study interpreting. So data interpreting studies are valuable to not just interpreting students or interpreting scholars, because if we look at interpreting, it is about everything. Interpreting is about multilingual communication. So by looking at or studying interpreting data, we can look at how multilingual communication may occur. Interpreting is definitely about spoken language features. We speak, right, in interpreting. So that's the very difference between interpreting and written translation. So in that case, the study of interpreting can help us understand further about spoken language features. Bearing in mind, interpreting can provide input to natural language processing as well. Because in interpreting, we are actually in a kind of environment that we are in a restrained, constrained situation. We're not speaking freely on our own behalf, but we are speaking on behalf of the original speaker. We're mediating at least two different parties in the conversation. So the kind of language process of interpreters can be very interesting, and then that can feed back into the study of natural language processing as well. Language therapy, there is a possibility that we're trying to investigate at the moment. There is a possibility that interpreting can help people to speak more, and then in that case, it may again feed back into language therapy to some certain extent. Interpreting is definitely about intercultural communication, especially in community interpreting settings. Then you are dealing with people from different cultures that you have to understand them fully in order to be able to interpret for them. Look at the subject areas of interpreting. Especially if you work as a freelancer, you're going to deal with almost every aspect, every subfield of human knowledge, politics, economy, healthcare, courts, etc., which means that you will be able to, and as a matter of fact, some of our interpreting graduates are now working in companies holding different positions just because they learned those subjects through interpreting. Some of them even finally became lawyers because they took very strong interest in legal interpreting and finally decided to study law in the end. So that's the reason why when you study interpreting data, we can provide insights into almost all subject areas. Okay. Interpreting is about history as well, because if you think about the long history of human interpreting, those events associated to interpreting can bring us back to the study of historical events. Technology, definitely, because when we look at the history of the professionalization of conference interpreting itself, machines, technology such as IBM play important, significant roles. So the study of interpreting can also help us to understand further about how those machines should be developed and how those machines played important roles in the history of interpreting. So let's return to the previous topic. What is an interpreting corpus? We mentioned that a corpus should constitute of authentic texts. So in interpreting, we review the different types of data formats of interpreting. So authentic texts, although texts may usually refer to written words, language elements, but in this case, authentic text in interpreting, I believe, can include not just written text, but also audios, videos, transcriptions of the audios and videos, and even, think about it, prior interpreting translations as well as note-taking. So all of those things relating to interpreting before, during, and after interpreting can be considered authentic texts in relevance to interpreting. If you expand that scope of interpreting data, then the interpreting corpora that you're working on can include many things. Second, very important information, electronic form. So for an interpreting corpus, we can study Word files, Excel, very, very popular in the early days of interpreting studies, PDF, TXT, XML, and more varieties can be included into the study of interpreting. Nowadays, we even have tools to study multimodality, so different modalities of interpreting data. We can have tools to help us to analyze videos and audios. So in this case, electronic form can include audio and videos in their original forms, not just written texts. Now, let's take a step back and look at the history of the development of corpus-based interpreting studies. We have to mention Miriam Schlesinger. Back in the year 1998, she wrote this paper, and this is the very declaration of building up corpus-based interpreting studies as a kind of offshoot of corpus-based translation studies. So instead of just looking at corpus-based translation studies, the capitalized T in Pochacker's words, which should include both written and spoken interpreting, in this case, we should treat them separately, and then we should look at interpreting data in particular. And Schlesinger in that paper mentioned the importance of studying interpreting specific data. And there are two very important publications I have to mention. And one of them is Breaking Ground in Corpus-Based Interpreting Studies. The book title indicates the status of how back then, it was 2011, if I remember correctly. So back then, how corpus-based interpreting studies status is like. And then after that, in 2018, we have making waves in corpus-based interpreting studies. So this indicates that after almost 10 years, we're trying to still making way in corpus-based interpreting studies. So in Robin Sutton's chapter about a review of corpus-based interpreting studies, he mentioned corpus-based interpreting studies was back then like a cottage industry. And this is an image of cottage industry. Look at it, it's very similar to the kind of where we constructed Corpora almost 20 years, more than 10 years ago. So it's about individuals conducting workshops and working most of the time individually, small corpora, and most of the cases we are doing handmade corpora. We're putting together handmade corpora and we use it, and then the research study is finished and then the corporate data are wasted and then not recycled. Very similar to this kind of cottage industry scenario described here. So to be more specific, a cottage industry is an industry primarily manufacturing, which includes many producers working from their homes and was often organized through the putting out system. So this is what I actually mentioned a little bit earlier on. So the corporate producers are usually working from their own computers, and then we at most organized through the corporate through what we may call a putting out system. So the putting out system refers to subcontracting work. Sometimes a corporate were constructed just because we got the subcontract, a kind of contract. And then we have the workshop system and domestic system to run parallel to each other. After that, we also talk about what we may call a central agent to subcontractors. Sometimes we have a central unit which focuses on certain areas of interpreting, and they put together researchers and then ask them to, through a workshop system, to produce corpora on their own. The production is carried out, usually was carried out in the home computer or in a workshop mode, and then it's still craftsmanship. Okay. Then in the second publication that I mentioned earlier, but that's all we mentioned, corpus-based interpreting studies entered what we may call a wild cottage industry. So the only difference here is wild. And then what does it mean? Wild has different definitions, but I'd like to focus on those keywords highlighted in red here, which refers to a corpus, in this case, or corpus studies are connected to a telecommunications network, and especially to the internet. So this time, we're not just working on the computer, we're searching data from the internet, and we're starting to put up our data onto the internet. And the connection to the internet features this wild feature of corpus-based interpreting studies. Okay. And again, I did a review of the book, and then we find that most of the corpora highlighted in that book are from Europe. And this is because of the European Parliament, which feature a lot of interpreting data, and also the European Parliament started to put up interpreting data, including videos, publicly accessible online for researchers, practitioners, and students. So that's the reason why we have a lot of corpora developed based on the European Parliament's data. If we look at the size of the corpora, none of them are very, very big, but still those corpora constitute the very good examples for how corpora should be constructed in the case of interpreting studies, and those corpora help to establish the standardization for corpora construction in the future work. But if we look at them, only 2 corpora on the list are publicly accessible. So this indicates this kind of wild communication. We have the internet involvement. We have corpora shared online, but still limited. Okay, so that's why this wild is, again, like my big interpreting data, put into quotation marks. Also from the same chapter, the Solly mentioned that corpora developed back then were not very big, and usually mega-sized corpora are very, very limited. So theoretically, what should be the next stage? What's the next for what we may call a wild cottage industry? Again, if we look back into the development, especially the proto-industrialization stage after what we mentioned about craftsman workshop stages of the economy development, then we can see proto-industrialization is the regional development alongside commercial agricultural or rural handicraft production for external markets. So this indicates that to move forward, we need to look outward instead of just looking inward. So what kind of external markets, what kind of external stakeholders we should involve in the next stage of corpus-based interpreting studies, or even interpreting studies at large? Here I would like to cite an early study. I worked together with my colleagues and my former teacher, and then I would like to say, after we reviewed research articles relating to interpreting studies, we find that most of the research articles are working from interdisciplinary perspective. So if we look forward, those originally interdisciplinary perspectives should be the areas that we bring into at this moment. So those should be the external markets, and they include neuroscience and cognitive studies. Actually, many of you are working on that now. Linguistic perspective, sociological perspective, communicative perspective, ideological perspective, and historic perspective. Those are the perspectives that we should try to bring in at this stage when we want to involve external markets, external parties in our future research. And you are on the right track because you're working on at least one or two of them now. Another possibility, will we really bring corpus-based interpreting studies to what we may call industrial revolution? It is possible, isn't it? Because if we look at the very definition of the industrial revolution, it constituted the transition to new manufacturing process. Of course, back then it was referring to the Europe and the United States. But I'd like to highlight here, the next stage will involve definitely machines, machine tools, and mechanized factory system. So that's the very factor, that's the very reason why I want to bring in data mining, and then we find a lot of similarities already in those two disciplines. So the way forward. Nowadays we're threatened by a lot of AI tools and many other technology advancements in different fields. Machine learning, deep learning, those terms sound very complicated and very threatening to the very discipline of our own to a certain extent. But I'd like to ask you to stay assured that you don't have to worry too much, because if you look at machine learning and deep learning, we have the input, we have the output, we have different processes, including feature extraction and classification in between. But what is shared among those kind of complicated process, what is fundamental about machine learning and deep learning is the input. And where is the input? What is the input? It's the data. It's Corpora. Look at ChatGPT. It is based on big size interpreting data. Sorry, not interpreting data, big size data. I'm talking about interpreting all night. So it's about data. Without the data, we don't have ChatGPT. ChatGPT to me is like a very good online corpus tool. It provides very clever filters, and then through the data, then those filters can generate certain kind of responses, very similar to visualization and certain kind of corporate tool that can generate to us. So the data is crucial. The data is still the most important thing for everything. So that's the reason why tonight we talk about data, and we talk about the importance of big data. Because in the long run, if we want to really try to underscore the importance of the discipline, if we really want to study more about the very nature of our discipline, big interpreting data is very important. Okay. So here, just a recapture of what we mentioned earlier. Corpus preparation and data mining share a lot of similarities. So in this case, if we think about how to develop, again, if we look within the discipline of interpreting studies, then the very crucial stage, very crucial step for every one of us to do in our research is the preparation of good corpus, the preparation of representative corpus, okay, for us to study the very subject that we want to work on. And we can make use of the tools, the visualization, all of the powerful tools can be made use of us by us in our research, in teaching, and also in practice. And that's the very reason we developed the CEPIC. Okay, so the first case study. The full name of the CEPIC is the Chinese English Political Interpreting Corpus. If you're interested in it, you can just scan the QR code, and then you will be able to enter the interface. It is an online corpus. You can use it for free. You don't have to pay for anything. The only requirement is to cite it. Okay, and you can even download the search results. So the reason why we developed the CEPIC was because they are, as mentioned earlier, very small. There is a very small number of open access interpreting corpora. And if we look at about cottage industry, wild cottage industry, most of the cases the corpora are used, and then when the research is done, the corpora are just disposed, and then nobody will be able to use the corpora. And then if you want to study something similar, you have to start constructing your own corpus, which is very time-consuming. So the very reason for us to develop this CEPIC corpus was because we want to help researchers to focus on what they need to research. So we do the tidy work, we do the tedious work, and then we help the researchers to put together a large size of corpus so that you can focus on your research question. And most importantly, by using the same corpus, you can compare your study results with others. Then you can achieve certain kind of consistency, and you can allow the research studies to be comparable to each other in the end. So that's another rationale. Of course, there are many other reasons, including accessibility of the data. We know that interpreting data can be very difficult to obtain, just because most of the cases when you do interpreting, especially community interpreting or conference interpreting, you have to sign a confidentiality agreement. You won't be able to share the data. But nowadays, more and more conferences are held online, and people don't mind sharing the data online. Therefore, data accessibility can be, it's still an issue, but it may not be such a big problem in the long run. A second difficulty lies in the annotation protocols. Like I mentioned, how far the annotation should go. We had a lot of discussions when we were trying to develop this corpus. And then sometimes if you annotate too much, you won't be able to finish the annotation. Sometimes if you annotate too little, the corpus has no practical use at all. So you have to decide how far you want to go. Of course, the most difficult part is spoken data transcription, but nowadays with natural language processing tools, we can actually provide automatic transcription, although we will need human input, and especially for some low resources language, such as Cantonese, you still need to involve a lot of human work in the final transcription. And also POS tagging. It is very efficient, and some of the POS tagging tools are very, very accurate already for written language, but for spoken language, our experience told us there are a lot of adaptations that we have to make. Okay. But we still managed to get the corpus developed, and then the CEPIC aims to provide an open access corpus covering Chinese and English language political interpreting, basically because those are regarded as the highest standard of interpreting outputs. And of course, another reason is because of the accessibility of data as well. We hope that through the CEPIC, we can provide a possible solution to the future collection of interpreting corpora by providing templates of metadata collection, solutions to spoken data transcription and annotation, and even POS tagging. So this is the interface you will see. So if you scan the QR code, this is the main interface you will be able to see. And this page describes the kind of data composition of the CEPIC. It is currently about 6.5 million word tokens, so at least a mega-sized corpus that can be considered big, not very big as compared to other disciplines, but within interpreting studies, we believe it's very big already. Okay. And it involves definitely not a one-woman work. So actually, this is the team of researchers and student helpers who helped me to put together the corpus data. And over a period of almost 5 years, I had weekly meetings with all of the project team. And then I tried to deal with all of the difficulties in the data collection and annotation. And then the student helpers helped me to understand the kind of problems in the annotation, and I kept on modifying the annotation scheme. Now the manual for annotation is at least 30 pages. But everyone who is joining the team will be given the manual. We will try to publish the manual online, so for future participants of the CEPIC, we're going to open up a new format of data sharing. And then you will be able to join the CEPIC team, you contribute to the CEPIC data, and then we give you access to the origin of the raw data, and then you can do your study. Not just be limited by the online platform, but in your own way. So this is, again, the composition of the data. We have Cantonese, Putonghua, and English. And we have comparable data sets. Basically, we lined up 4 different locales of political interpreting: Hong Kong, Beijing, Washington, D.C., and London. Of course, we also have bilateral meeting data between PRC key politicians and their counterparts in the US and the UK. So those subsets can be comparable to each other. And we have budget speech and political speeches which cover similar genres, similar kind of topics that can be comparable to each other as well. And we also, we talked about talking to people, talking to the external market. So for the development of the CEPIC data, I included in layman's language some certain terms included on the search platform that may be familiar to interpreting scholars or students, but not so familiar, not so commonly used for other disciplines. Therefore, we ensure that people who don't have any knowledge of interpreting can also have access to the corpus data and then try to play around with it. We included the raw, what we call the raw data, and also the annotated data. The raw data can be comparable to written translation to a certain extent. Basically, they are extracted from existing publications, like the policy speeches, and then they are written language to a certain format. But the annotated data took us a lot of time, because in the annotated data we included pauses, disfluences, pitch change, and other extra and paralinguistic features. And actually, in 2020, we updated the corpus. We didn't announce it, but we updated the corpus by adding searchable features for those extra linguistic features as well. So now you can search for pauses in CEPIC. And for those who are interested in these fluencies, then you can now search for example, long pauses and short pauses. Short pauses, so for 3 dots, actually they refer to short pauses. The more the dots, the longer the duration of the pauses. So you can compare the long pauses to the short pauses and then find out kind of patterns. We also have repetitions. We have fillers such as and other fillers, and we have a systematic way of annotating them. And if you look at the Cantonese data, for those who understand Cantonese, you will be able to see we annotated them according to the way how Cantonese is spoken instead of written. And then we added those particles, what we may call, into the corpus data, so that you will be able to look into the patterns of the particles as well. And we also have a manual on how to transcribe all of those those particles in Cantonese. So this is the interface of the CEPIC, and you will be able to see after you do the searching, you can find the basic information, what we may call the metadata, and this searchable results are can be downloaded to your own laptop in the Excel format. And then you will be able to see the color case of certain keywords that you search. And then we added another function again back in 2020. We didn't announce it. That is when you click for certain keywords. For example, here you have you have freedom as the keyword, but you have the color case of freedom. But if you search for off, if you click off, then you will be able to see all of the color case of both freedom and off. Okay. This added feature can help us to understand more about the corpus pattern, the kind of language pattern. We also included the sources of all of the data, and we included videos, the links to the videos as well. So CEPIC is not technically multimodal, but to a certain extent leads us to multimodal corpus data production to a certain extent by including the links of the videos at least. So that's the reason why a couple of my colleagues who doesn't understand Chinese told me that they can use the CEPIC to study Cantonese, say for example, by clicking the videos. We also, as I mentioned, we also tried to find out the best POS tagger, but we tried to use our own way to enhance the performance of the tagger. We have written a paper to explain the kind of procedure that we employed in corpus data in CEPIC annotation, especially in dealing with, as I mentioned earlier, the GAN and other Cantonese particles. If you're interested, the article is going to appear very soon and is publicly accessible. So for keyword search, you can either search for a keyword or you can just click on the blank space, and then you'll be able to see a list of possible words. Otherwise, if you don't have an idea of what you want to look for, you can search for the CEPIC, and then there is a list of words, word list, for each of the subcorpus and the entire corpus. Then you can look at the word list and then find out certain kind of patterns and words that you want to look for. Here I'd like to mention, if I can return to the previous slide, all of those information, including the part of the speech, location, the speaker information, the interpreter information, the delivery mode, and also the year, all of those information are what we call metadata in interpreting. That takes a lot of time for you to collect, of course, but once you have them, you will be able to search the data according to, now we turn that into what we call filters. Then you will be able to extract the data to your research purpose. There are three main functions. We have the keyword search, I mentioned a little bit earlier, word collocation, mentioned as well. But we also have the expanded keyword in context. When you click in, then you will be able to see 6 parallel texts in certain in parallel formats. Then you will be able to analyze and then look into those data. For some cases, you may only be able to see 4 or 2 boxes. It means that that batch of data only involves certain language combinations. So here we have examples for a keyword search. If you choose interesting, say for example, I use interesting as an example because political interpreting can hardly be said to be interesting. So I wanted to see how interesting the original data can reveal itself. And then if you choose the speaker role, member of a parliament in the United Kingdom, choose the default time frame, and then choose annotated because that will be the interpreting data. You will be more interested in that batch of data. Then you will only be able to see 8 cases of interesting. And the 3 of them are produced by the same speaker, Tyree and Drew. 2 by Bell Stewart and 2 by Bell's Ed, and then you will be able to see maybe this. Of course, the numbers are too small, but still you may be able to see certain kind of speaker style displayed in the usage of certain words. Word collocation I explained a little earlier, so I will skip that part. For expanded keyword in context, again, if you search interesting in Hong Kong, 1997 to 2017, choose the raw data, then you'll be able to see only 2 cases of interesting in the Hong Kong subset. And then if you look into them, you will be able to see, for example, in the first case, we have the English raw, which is interpreted. We have interesting. But if you look at the Putonghua raw and Cantonese raw, the Cantonese raw should be the original text. Interesting is gone. So why? The source text is omitted. What happened to them? So for those who are interested in learning, especially discourse analysis, you will be able to explore further those cases. But in the second case, when you have interesting, which is the interpreted version, then in the 普通话 interpreting, we have 有意思的. But the Cantonese is 有趣, a different term. Again, you will be able to see why this case we have the original text relevant to interesting interpreted and displayed. But in the previous case, no. The only terms of use, as I mentioned, is to cite the corpus so that we can acknowledge the funding and the hard work in the past years. You can also find a manual and how to search on the website. As I mentioned, you can find high frequency words from the word list so if you don't have any kind of research idea. We think that for student interpreters and translators, the CEPIC provides a large database of high-quality Chinese and English text delivered by native politicians and government interpreters or translators. You can use the CEPIC to prepare translation and interpreting tasks and obtain online support during translations and possibly interpreting, but of course, you need a partner in the booth. For researchers, you can study interpreted language, translation, compare translation with interpreting, to study the CEPIC and political discourse. Here are just some sample studies. So, for example, we compared what we call the pragmatic markers in the interpreted corpus and the non-interpreted, what we call the native corpus. And then we find certain kind of patterns of the usage of the different, what we call the pragmatic markers. And then we can zoom in to look at the differences of how those differences, how the pragmatic markers such as but and however are used in the corpus. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, some of my colleagues mentioned that they can actually use the CEPIC for language learning, which I believe is true. You can also study it, definitely use it to study politician language. Spoken language, as I mentioned, you can search. By the way, if you want to search the CEPIC, if you want to search fillers, instead of putting in ER, you have to put ER into square brackets. You can try it now, but it will generate a lot of findings because there are a lot of E's. So you may want to limit the data to certain years or certain regions, and then you will be able to see how, for example, E's are used in the sub-corpora or in the entire corpus. As I mentioned, you can also search for pauses. If you put 3 dots will be too, you will, again, it takes time and you will have too many results. Try 12 dots. Or, I remember in extreme cases, we have 18 dots. Try 18 dots, that's the longest pauses that you can find. So try that and you may be able to find interesting patterns that suit your study purpose. Semi-automatic language processing for transcription, POS tagging, and then annotation. Definitely, we can make use of them to make use of the annotated data, the processed data for machine learning, so that we can train the machine to be cleverer, to be more accurate, and then the machine can be used again into further annotation of a future language data to provide more accurate picture, so you don't have to waste so much manpower. We would like to invite you to join what we call the CEPIC community. Actually, my PhD student, Fernando, is organizing the first CEPIC forum. And it will be mixed mode, and we invite everybody to join us. So if you check the first QR code, you will be able to see updates about the CEPIC forum and any information that is relevant to the CEPIC. We will post the meeting link. And if you are interested in exploring CEPIC together with us and also to discuss how to share data in the future, because we are updating the CEPIC now. We got the funding luckily and we're now updating the corpus, and we hope to be able to cover a more up-to-date picture of the same set of data that we collected before. So please stay tuned and let us know if you have any kind of questions and queries. We are using the funding to develop what we call CEPIC 2, version 2. It includes not just transcripts, but we also hope to be able to include timestamps and video data. so that the data can be more powerful. Of course, it takes much time. But we, on the other hand, we hope to keep the data up to date, at least now it's 2023. We want to keep it up to date to until this year. For visualization purposes, you will be able to build up word clouds based on a large corpus such as the CEPIC. You will be able to study the patterns. For example, in the previous paper, I discussed how government, people, and we are used through the subsets, the Hong Kong subsets and the UK subsets, and how that kind of usage changed over time, and how it may reflect the kind of political standing of the different government officials, and how interpreters play certain kind of roles in mediating those meaning. Of course, you can use other tools such as Lanka Box to help you generate more interesting information of the collocates of the words and also the patterns of the collocates of the words, and then compare them across different subcorpora. Of course, you can use more powerful natural language processing tools such as IBM to help you to analyze, for example, sentiments. So this is an experiment done by my student Fernando. So he finds very interesting information by extracting the Q&A data and also the press conference data. Basically, in the Q&A, you will be able to see more positive. Sorry, the press conference is too small now. My screen is it better here? Small. I think the original finding was that in the Q&A, there are less positive sentiments as compared to the press conference itself. So through those kind of powerful tools, of course there are mistakes, but if the data size is big enough, sometimes you will be able to still find some certain kind of patterns that can reveal very interesting knowledge that we didn't know before. Okay, so this serves as an example. For practitioners, of course, we hope that we can include more text variety. Now it's only political interpreting. We hope to include more data. Actually, I told Frank earlier that we are now working on rare diseases, and we hope to be able to develop a community interpreting subset in the future so that we may be able to compare it to the political interpreting data. We can enhance the interface for better online support so that we may be able to provide certain kind of computer-assisted interpreting tools for certain tasks in the future, for not just the terminology generation, but also more online interpreting support for interpreters. For researchers, we want the corpus to be bigger, more language combinations. Of course, the more the merrier, so that we can be able to study interpreting across different languages to see whether certain kind of phenomena, whether they are influenced by language pairs or not. We want to have better representation of multimodal data as shown earlier. For tool developers, we hope that they can make use of the CEPIC for semi-automatic to even automatic spoken data transcription, tagging and annotation, for better audio, visual text data alignment, better visualization of multilingual data as well. So there are a lot of things we can do, but it can be, again, not a one man or one woman's work. We need to link up TNI researchers to computational linguists, to developers, computer programmers, and the statisticians. We have updated publications, and again, scan the QR code, you will be able to see more updates relating to the CEPIC development. I think time is limited. Let me briefly introduce the second project, which is the CETILC. The CETILC is different from the CEPIC because it mainly involves a lot of learner data. Because we believe through the progression of language learners to TNI students, to professional translators and interpreters, there's certain kind of migration and there's certain kind of patterns that we can study. So that's the very reason why we developed the CETILC as a sister corpus to the CEPIC. Another reason is because learner corpora in translator and in particular interpreter training is very rare because of the coding and annotation of errors are notoriously inconsistent and time-consuming. even worse than the case of annotating professional interpreters' data. There's a lack of paradigm and annotation scheme, and also people don't know if you have spent so much time annotating the work, how widely applicable the data can be. Also, there is a lack of empirical research on both translator and interpreter competence and performance around assessing process of and the products of different purposes, especially those of interest to industry, pedagogy, and research. Of course, there are challenges in tertiary level TNI training that we have to address as well. So competence enhancement becomes a crucial area that we have to focus on, but we need some guidance. And then we looked into the different kind of competence that we want to focus on, and in the end, we zoomed in and we wanted to focus on textual level competence, because for both interpreters and translators, we found that there is a plateau period for trainees, and then the plateau period actually are usually hindered by the acquisition of textual level devices or language strategies. And then we decided to work on this aspect. And then the CETILC data, we chose to focus on the annotation of text level features. And then we zoomed in further, and we hope that through the CETILC, we will be able to see the kind of progression of how language learners become translation and interpreting learners, and finally professional translators and interpreters. So in the CEPIC, we have the source language, we have the student output, we have multiple student outputs of the same source language, of the same source text, and we also have professional interpreters and translators output. And for some subsets, we have the same text to be simultaneously interpreted, or consecutively interpreted, or even rendered through side translation. And then we can use the same set to compare the kind of performance of the student interpreters and translators. But a shared feature is that all of those data are thickly annotated with lexical cohesive devices, because we wanted to look at cohesion, and in particular lexical cohesion in interpreting and translation. So through the thick annotation, the process is semi-automatic. We have written a paper, 2020, published in Babel, and then if you're interested, you can look into the process of how we did the annotation and what kind of sample results we can build up. But basically, through the CETILC data, through the thick annotation, we will be able to see say for example, the progression from intermediate level of the interpreters to professional level interpreters, or what may be the kind of usage, what may be the patterns of intermediate level interpreters as compared to professional level interpreters. Then we will see how to enhance those aspects in pedagogy, in education. Another feature which I liked very much, so in the original publication it's like a tree diagram, but my original thought was an octopus-shaped word net. So it's not really a word net, because we have the original word, like for example, in this case, Hanzi, Chinese characters. And then we have all of the linguistic devices, the tools, the kind of annotations we generated. For example, repetition of the same word, or you can have a hyperlink. A hyperlink to Hanzi can be zi, which is at an upper level. And you can have the Chinese source text, and then you can have the English variations. So it can serve as a kind of thesaurus, but beyond the level of the thesaurus, because you have the Chinese version, you have the English version, you have all of the lexical cohesive devices. For students, this can be very, very useful, because then you can learn which device you want to focus on, and what varieties of words that you can make use of. So the way forward, as I mentioned earlier, we want to include more language varieties, and we want to expand the current size of the CEPIC. So luckily, we obtained funding to support the further development of the CEPIC. And then the CETILC is to be published online pretty soon. In a similar way to CEPIC, we want to have it open access. And then we started a new way of data sharing through the CETIC, because then you can make use of all of the visualizations that we produced over there. you upload your own data, you will get your own visualization, and you will be able to compare your data to the previously collected data, even by using the same source text. And then you will be able to generate larger size of corpus. So this is the way forward that we hope to achieve. Now is the commercial stage. And we want to let you know that we know, as mentioned many times, this is not a one-man or one-woman work. We want to use the CEPIC and CELTIC and those kind of projects to train future researchers like you. And in Hong Kong, we have a couple of different fundings that provide very good opportunities for people who want to either explore a PhD study. So this one is old already, but usually we have the Hong Kong PhD fellowship scheme. My student Fernando is currently on the scheme, and he's very happy about his study at the moment because the funding is very sufficient, and also it gives you extra funding for you to attend academic conferences and to do academic exchanges during your study. And this is the funding amount that the old one, the new one can be very similar, but pay attention. The usual deadline of application is the 1st of December, which means that you have to get the proposal ready and pass the interview by that stage. So start preparing for your research proposals. For those who are about to complete your PhD, we have a parallel scheme, the postdoctoral fellowship scheme. Again, if you scan the QR code, you will be able to see the page, and you can see this deadline is quite close. It's the 8th of, I think this is last year's one. Yeah. For this year, it's similar again. The deadline is going to be October or September, which means that you'd better start to prepare for your proposals. So we hope that more and more researchers can develop research questions and think about the ways that you can make use of the CEPIC and the CELTIC. And then you don't have to develop your corpus start from scratch, but you can tap into the mega-sized Corpora. For the CELTIC, it's 1 million. It's quite a lot, and then we need more people to contribute to the data, so that maybe in the future it can be on par with the CEPIC as well. So we hope that more students can join us and to help us to study and to expand, and also to use the Corpora to find out more about your research questions and what you are interested in studying. So those are the projects, the fundings that we want to acknowledge, and we appreciate very much the kind of support from the fundings, because without such kind of fundings, we won't be able to develop such big Corpora, because it's a lot of man work. At the end of the presentation, I'd like to open up for questions and comments or feedback or anything that you want to discuss about the future of corpus-based studies or ChatGPT, if you like, anything.
I noticed that it was mentioned that the CELTIC corpus were compared to professionals interpreting to students interpreting. I wonder how you're collecting data from both the students interpreting and professional interpreting. Do you actually recruit an experiment and recruit students to join it, or do you really collect the natural interpreting practice?
Thank you. I think this is a very nice question. We did it both ways, and because we want to provide. So this is the tutorial of the future CEPIC. It's very small. I originally wanted to show you the tentative interface of it, but I find the original link expired and we have to activate it again. It takes too much time. But through the tutorial, you'll be able to see it has a lot of shared features with the CEPIC, but what is important is that we have a lot of information collected. So we have naturalistic data. For some certain cases, if we use interpreted or translated data from the internet, say for example, then those translated or interpreted data will be transcribed in a way in the shared format of the CELTIC, and then we put it into the corpus. So that will be naturalistic data. And for student data, normally what we did was to actually, basically, we have students studying interpreting or translation, and then we obtained the consent from them for their classwork. And then if they, like tonight, you have the examination. So if they attended the examination and if they get the consent to us to include their data in the corpus, then they will be able to contribute data to the corpus. And we give them, we promised to give them first-hand information about the materials and the visualizations that we provide. And then we give them, if we have to subscribe to the CETILC in the long run, it depends on how the development is going, then we will definitely give all of the data contributors free accounts. So this way, most of the students are very happy to join, and then they give the data to us. And so that can be considered as in between naturalistic or experimental setting. But we do have experimental setting as well. And then in that case, we will mark those settings in the filter, and then you can compare naturalistic data to experimental data. So for the CETILC, we wanted to include, because we wanted to look at the kind of progression of students and also the kind of task variety and other things, how they influence the very performance of interpreters. So that's the very reason why we included more filters, more metadata as compared to the CEPIC. I hope that helped to answer the question.
Would such complexity of data limit the size of the corpus?
That can be definitely a very good statement. Yes, it does. But that's the very reason I mentioned about the very size of the CETILC is 1 million. Still very big as compared to like a normal learner corpus, especially interpreting learner corpus, because you have to do the annotation, transcription, and everything. You spend a lot of time. And also, we open up this possibility of sharing data. So in the future, we will give all of the source text and also the target text, possibly the reference text we may call, to future researchers. Like in your case, if you want to collect 20 students' data, you can upload your data. Using the SEP, we will give you an Excel, very easy to use, and then just you input your data, and then your data will be able to appear on the SEP platform, and then you will be able to see all of the visualization, the keywords, and other things here. So through this means, so that's the last question I wanted to address. Data limitation can be solved if we have collaboration from researchers and future researchers like you. That's why we hope more people can join this initiative so that we can expand the data size. And then we believe with this 1 million or even in the long run 6 million or even more data size, we won't have to worry about the limitation of subsets of the data. That's the very beauty of big data in interpreting, isn't it?
Professor Han, I want to ask a kind of follow-up question about the existing and future standards in selecting or collecting your data, because you've already built the learners' corpus and the professional corpus and corpus in different aspects. But I'm just thinking, like, what if it's a really bad, pathetic kind of performance by a nervous amateur, like in which you may count like more than 18 dots in the awkward long voices? Will that kind of performance even be allowed into the corpus? Because I think today's machine translation models, they're just like crunching all kinds of data they can get. And do you think, like in the future, the different existing interpreting corpus may merge into one really huge or several really huge like mega corpus? And what do you make of like the future really big size corpus, like without the quotation marks on the big?
Yeah. I think actually we're talking about two things. So the last question is the easier one, so I'm going to address the last question first. So it's actually the project I'm working on together with Butler Frank and Machiara Rosso, because both of them worked on the European Parliament data and they are the early developers of the EPIC data, and they have their own data sources, and we are thinking of ways to merge our data. So that is the very essence of this collaborative project. So we're going to help them to expand the current size of the corpus, because they developed the corpus very, very early, a lot of manual work. So we wanted to see whether the method we employed in the CEPIC can be duplicated to help those two Corpora developers to increase the data size to at least a mega size. And then we're going to update the current size of the CEPIC data as well. And we are going to try to merge them. And as a matter of fact, Fernando, again, who graduated from his MPhil, graduated with a thesis on how to change the different formats of data. And that can serve as an important step in the very stage of what we may call corpus re-engineering or corpus integration. And then that is the long run, and that is what we are working on at the moment. Because we don't want people's efforts to be wasted. And if you look at the method we developed, the CETILC, it is very similar. We share the data collection format, you follow the format, you contribute to the entire size of the corpus, and then you get your own visualization by using the tool that we developed, because we want to share it with everybody. We don't want it to keep it to just ourselves. We want people to see how powerful those bigger size data can help us to understand more about interpreting studies in general. About the first issue, actually it's not that difficult. So it can be split into two scenarios. If you have 18 dots, is it because of the competence level of the interpreter or the student interpreter, or is it because it's just a language feature, or is it because of certain kind of discourse parameters that restricted the production of the language? I personally think because in the CEPIC, which is professional, which constitute of politician talk, which constitute of professional interpreter, translators work, you still see those 18 dots, 12 dots at least. So it means that there's some reason for people to produce those 18 or 12 dots, those long pauses. So this may be a language feature, this may be a kind of feature of constrained language. That's the reason why we need to study all of those scenarios. If it's a discourse feature, it may be a strategy of the interpreter. Maybe it's because the original speaker said something very sensitive, and the interpreter couldn't find a way to mitigate it or to render it into the target language, and then pauses are used as a kind of natural strategy here instead of an indication of the lower competence of the interpreter. But for student interpreter, there are certain cases. For the development of the CETIC, we know that sometimes when students get very, very nervous, then the data can show a lot of dots, say for example, a lot of repetitions. We still collected those data. The key is to annotate the stage of the student interpreters. If they're beginning student interpreters, it shows the kind of areas that they need to improve. That's the reason why nowadays we talk about impacting research. People will say, "Oh, you have so limited number of student interpreters. Why should we focus on developing interpreting programs?" And then the very reason is that we can tell them, because by looking at those kind of interpreting data, we can change the entire curriculum of not just interpreting, but also the training of future language professionals. We can tell, say for example, the Education Bureau, what are the deficiencies of the current training programs, and what kind of teaching resources, say for example, the kind of visualization, the kind of progression visualization we produced, and then we can show them to the government to tell them, well, those are the areas that we need to improve, and those are the tools that we developed for you to find out the areas that we need to improve. So again, bring in the external shareholders, and then let them understand what you're doing. You're welcome.
Hi, Professor Pan. A very specific question. I want to know whether an intermediate format of the corpus can be developed if you want to merge different corpus together. I mean, because now we are learning titles, and when we are use the PM, there is a kind of intermediate format, so that we can use the same PM and different safety tools. So whether in the merging of the different corpus, whether we can, like an intermediate format of the corpus can be developed, so that we can merge different corpus together. Maybe the format that it can be compatible in different corpus tools.
Once the corpora merged, then we will produce different formats. For example, we can produce a data frame of the merged corpus. We can also produce the traditional like TXT files or XML files. So the key is not the output format, but how to merge the different variables, how to merge the metadata, how to merge the POS tagging, because we use the different ways to tag part of the speech of the language. So we have to merge, and we have to consider what kind of factors we need to keep, whether we have to redo certain kind of steps to achieve this kind of standardization of the data. But the output is not a concern, because once the data is merged, then we can transform them into different data formats, and then we can analyze them in any kind of tools that we want to make use of. So that is not the greatest concern that we have at the moment, but the decision process is the most important. Especially, I think what will be valuable is the shared metadata part, the shared POS tags. But what can cost a lot of time, what can be a headache to all of us, will be the differences, and how we merge the differences will be the key. But we do have a solution. We will be able to include as many variables as possible, so that we don't waste the previous annotation or any kind of metadata collected before. So inclusive is the most important word here.
Another very big question, because I know the data in the corpus, it is aligned in the text level, right? So I'm wondering whether if we, also because we're learning the turtle, so I'm wondering whether we can align it in a more small level. Then if we want to use the corpus to do some research, then the results will be preciser.
Yes. Yeah, indeed. I think that's a very, very good question, and the quick answer is definitely yes. The CEPIC was actually collected aligned at the paragraph level, because as you know, in interpreting in particular, sometimes especially in simultaneous interpreting, sometimes you have to return to previous sentence. So if you match it on the sentence level, it doesn't make sense. That's the reason why I made the hard decision and decided to work on the paragraph level, so that we can return to at least one or two sentences before, and then you will be able to compare the translated version to the source language. But yes, alignment at sentence level is definitely possible. We can use certain alignment tools. Even Trados can help us to do initial alignment of the sentences. We do have, in a different project, I collaborated together with a colleague, and the research assistant, who is now a PhD student of our department, Zhilu, developed a tool. I'm promoting his tool now, and my PhD students are making use of the tool. He originally developed the tool for the alignment of Wikipedia data, and the tool can automatically match the sentences according to a number of 0 to 1. Say, for example, 0 means that they are not, or -1 I don't remember. But if you have one, it means the sentence is a definite match. And then with that too, then you can automatically align up all of the sentences according to the similarity of the language. At least it worked very well between Chinese and English. So in natural language processing, there are a lot of tools that can help us achieve this goal. So again, we don't have to worry too much about the level of alignment, but there are some certain decisions that you have to make. For this case, for interpreting, especially for the case of simultaneous interpreting, I personally think a paragraph level alignment works the best. Research purpose. But you can definitely use other tools to realign the sentences to achieve your own research goals.
Okay, since you said that you have made a decision to align it in a paragraph level, what if you can also in the CEPIC, maybe according to different the text genres, maybe the different ways of alignment may have different results. So maybe because you focus on the political field, maybe in other fields, or instead of SI, or maybe in other interpreting modes, maybe other alignment mode like sentence level or paragraph level will work better.
It depends on, again, what your research question is. In our case, if we're looking, for example, if you're looking at the pattern of the pauses in the source language as compared to the target language, the alignment doesn't influence the comparison. Because you're not comparing sentence level pauses. Unless you're working at the sentence level, I want to say by sentence, how many, but I want to do it this way. I would apply natural language processing method of calculating 10 words. Every 10 words, how many, because in natural language processing, the idea of sentences and other things sometimes the borders of the sentence may not be that important. You treat them as bags of words. And then you see how those words are putting in succession to each other. So unless you want to really say, I want to study how within sentence level the distribution of pauses may matter. Otherwise, for most of the research questions, I don't see the necessity of putting too much focus on the alignment. Or unless you want to focus on, say, for example, automatic translation or automatic annotation of translated words. In that case, you may want to narrow down or to have a shorter segment, I call it segment, for annotation. But otherwise, I think the general pattern will still be the same. Do you get my meaning here? Yeah. But that's a very important way of thinking about your data. And it's a very important question. I agree. Seems that we're exhausted by too many bags of words produced by me.
More questions?
Thank you. So thank you very much, professors, for your sharing. All of the tours are very meaningful and useful for researchers, I can see. And I just have one tiny question about the language features that you have included. I'm wondering, have you considered including code switching as a language feature in the target language? Will it be marked as a responsive or?
It's marked. It's marked as code switching. We did it. Thank you for asking. And you can actually search for it. You can search for all of the code switch. But I have to look into the manual to tell you. I think it's code switching. We marked it with code switching. You can try it. Use a hyphenate in between code and switching. You will be able to see all of the cases. And we did mark it. Yeah. You're welcome. And we even marked the coughing of the speakers and the interpreters as well. Raising tone, lowering tone, all included.
Any more questions? Any more questions? Yeah, I think we also thank Professor Tan for the wonderful lecture. So systematically explaining to us what we can do with Corpora in interpreting studies. And thank you for introducing this very useful projects. It's very useful Corpora. And finally, we actually got lots of things in common. I hope that yes, we will have a lot more opportunities to share and to collaborate in the future. So thank you. Well, also thanks for the wonderful questions and especially the great answers. Thank you very much.